My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 39 years old. I live just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, in a modest 3-bedroom townhouse that smells faintly of cinnamon and wet crayons most days. I work as a remote medical transcriptionist, which sounds dull until you realize it gives me the freedom to be exactly where I'm needed most, at home. With my niece Ava, she is 10 now. I've raised her since she was a baby. She loves blueberries in her pancakes, insists on brushing her teeth while dancing to 80s music, and still crawls into my bed when thunderstorms roll in. She doesn't call me mom. Not yet. But she calls me first, for every scraped knee, math test, and nightmare. I never intended to be a full-time parent. Not like this. It started out as a favor. A temporary thing, as my brother put it. But we'll get to that later. What I want to tell you, what cracked something deep inside me, happened just 2 Sundays ago. At a family brunch I never wanted to attend. It was hosted at my parents' place. The kind of forced gathering that smells like too much perfume and passive aggression. I'd baked banana bread and braided Ava's hair into 2 perfect coils. We were barely in the door when my sister-in-law Tasha swooped in, all designer heels and hollow compliments. Oh wow, she smiled at Ava, air-kissing her cheek. You've grown so much. I swear I barely recognize you anymore. Ava glanced up at me, confused. She sees Tasha maybe 3 times a year. I smoothed a hand over her shoulder. We sat, ate, made small talk that scraped like sandpaper. My brother, Mark, barely looked my way. My parents doted on Tasha, laughing too loudly at her stories about spa treatments and office politics. Ava quietly munched on fruit and leaned her head against my arm. And then it happened. Tasha stood to refill her mimosa. Someone, I don't even remember who, asked how she managed raising Ava while managing such a high-powered marketing job. She laughed. Loudly, almost theatrically. Oh no, I don't do any of that, she said, waving her glass. Claire handles all that boring mom stuff. I mean, she's basically just the babysitter, right? Just the babysitter. She said it like she was complimenting me. Like I should be honored by the recognition. The room went still, but only for a second. Then my mother chuckled, as if to smooth the moment over. My father cleared his throat. Mark sipped his coffee like it wasn't his daughter we were talking about. And nobody, not one person, looked at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I smiled. That same tight-lipped smile women wear when the words are too heavy to swallow but too dangerous to spit out. The kind that stretches across your face like tape over a crack. Later that night, after I'd tucked Ava into bed and triple-checked her backpack for Monday, I sat at the kitchen table. The banana bread, untouched, was still in its foil. The dishes were in the sink. And I opened the drawer where I kept the folder. It was navy blue, with a silver clasp. Inside were printouts, letters, photos, copies of pediatrician records, school report cards with my name listed as the emergency contact, handwritten notes from teachers, birthday party invitations addressed to me, permission slips, signed in, my handwriting. Evidence, really, of a life lived, not a babysitter's life, a mother's. You see, 10 years ago, Tasha had an emergency surgery just 4 weeks after Ava was born. Mark called in a panic. Could I watch the baby for 2 weeks? Just until things settled. 2 weeks became a month. A month became a season. By the time Ava turned 1, I was waking up every morning to change her, feed her, soothe her colic. I learned what formula she tolerated, what lullabies worked, what sleep cries were fake and which ones meant real fear. Tasha went back to work, and never really came back home, at least not as a mother. She said she was too tired, or not the maternal type, or needed time to find herself. Mark, he was always busy, late hours, golf trips, excuses. They called it co-parenting. I called it survival. At first, I didn't mind. I had just come out of a breakup. I worked from home. I loved Ava fiercely, and every time I tried to raise the subject, legal guardianship, long-term planning, I got a casual "we'll figure it out" or "don't make things complicated." So I stopped asking. But I started documenting. Because I've seen families fall apart over assumptions. And I've learned, the hard way, that love without proof means nothing in courtrooms. Or in brunches, apparently. That night, after the babysitter comment, I sat at the table and updated everything. The folder was thicker than I remembered. 8 years of being a silent shadow in someone else's narrative. 8 years of doing everything but being named. And the worst part, Ava heard it. She didn't say anything right away, but I saw the shift. On the car ride home, she asked, "Why did Aunt Tasha say you're the babysitter?" I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Well," I said gently, "sometimes people don't always understand how families work." She was quiet. Then, "You're not the babysitter?" I nodded. "I know. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Not anymore." That comment, that single sentence, didn't just hurt my pride. It invalidated everything I've done for a decade. It exposed how replaceable they believed I was, how fragile my place in Ava's life really was, at least in their eyes. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to demand validation. I wasn't going to beg for recognition at family functions or hope for scraps of gratitude. I was going to prepare. I was going to protect Ava the way I always have, fully, quietly, and completely. Only now. I wasn't just going to love her like a mother. I was going to fight for her like one. And this time, I'd do it in a way they couldn't laugh off over mimosas. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I dozed, for a few minutes at a time, my mind looping over the same question. How did I let it get this far without a word? I wish I could say it all started with one big lie. But the truth is, it didn't. It started with love. With trust. With the kind of naive hope that tells you family always comes through, and that kindness won't cost you your identity. Ava was born in June, I remember, because it was unbearably hot that week, and I'd just moved into my new place. Fresh start, post-breakup, new chapter and all that. Mark called the day after she was born, voice shaky, asking if I could come help. Tasha had developed some kind of infection after the C-section, and things weren't looking good. I dropped everything. When I stepped into that hospital room, Ava was tiny, pink, quiet, sleeping on her side in a plastic bassinet. Tasha looked pale and annoyed. Mark looked exhausted. I remember asking where our parents were, and he said they were in Florida. "You're the only one we trust with her," he added. That line sat heavy in my chest, like a gift I didn't know was a debt. They brought Ava home, but within days, the stress got to Tasha. She refused to do night feedings, said it made her dizzy. Mark was overwhelmed. He begged me to stay just for the weekend. I stayed. The weekend turned into a week. Then 2. By the end of the month, I had memorized the rhythm of Ava's cries, the pattern of her bottle burps, the soft little huff she made when she was falling asleep. Mark and Tasha said they needed time to adjust. I told them I understood. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. One day, Tasha stopped coming home at all. She said she needed space to recover, that she'd moved into her sister's condo for mental health reasons. I didn't argue. I just kept rocking Ava and writing emails between naps. Mark tried to juggle it all. Work, hospital visits for Tasha, diapers, but eventually, he asked if Ava could stay with me full-time until things settled. That was 3 months. By Ava's first Christmas, I was doing midnight pharmacy runs, registering her for early learning programs, buying onesies on sale, and mailing out holiday cards with her in a Santa bib. Mark showed up for the card photos but forgot the pediatric appointment. Tasha sent a gift from Amazon with no note. Still, I told myself it was temporary. That people parent in different ways. That maybe this was just their version of adjusting. But, by Ava's second birthday, I knew better. Tasha had re-entered the picture just enough to host a lavish party she barely attended. She rented a photographer and made a spectacle of cutting the cake. Then left early, saying she had a dinner reservation. Mark pulled me aside afterward, holding 2 crumpled envelopes. "This one's from Mom and Dad. And this," he said, handing me a thinner one, "is for you. From us." Ava had received a savings bond, clothes, toys. I opened my envelope. It was a handwritten thank you card with a single gift card inside, $50 to a department store I never shopped at. "I know it's not much," Mark had said, already backing away, "but we really appreciate everything." I said, "Nothing." That was louder than anything. After the guests left and the balloons began to sag, I stayed behind to clean. I found myself wiping frosting off Eva's tiny fingers as she slept on my lap. the kind of simple, quiet moment no one sees but somehow defines everything. By the time Ava turned 4, it wasn't even discussed anymore. She lived with me. I enrolled her in school. I took her to the dentist. Every time a form required a parent or guardian signature, I hesitated, then signed anyway. Not because I was legally entitled to, but because no one else ever showed up. Sometimes, I'd gently bring it up with Mark. Ask if we should talk about Ava's future. Legal rights, medical emergencies. What would happen if something ever happened to me? His answers were always the same. Don't overthink it, Claire. You're doing great. Let's just keep things simple. Simple for him, maybe not for me. Never for Ava. Tasha would reappear every now and then. Usually when a camera was present or there was something to post on social media. Mother-daughter brunches, matching dresses, half-hearted captions. Then she'd vanish again, like smoke. The contrast was sharpest on school days. I'd stand in the cold with other moms, waiting to pick up their kids. The teacher would nod at me like any other parent. Ava would run into my arms like I was the only person who mattered, and for a while, I convinced myself that was enough. But it was only enough until it wasn't. I started keeping a folder after Ava's 5th birthday. Quietly, no drama. Just details. Photocopies of immunization records, enrollment forms, emails, texts, all of it showing that, while my name might not be on a birth certificate, I was there. Always there. Every scraped knee. Every spelling test. Every parent-teacher conference where I sat alone. I kept the folder hidden, not out of shame, but out of instinct. The way you'd protect something precious when you sense it's more fragile than anyone admits. That year, Ava caught the flu. Bad. She had a fever for 3 days straight, delirious, shivering, barely able to hold down fluids. I called Mark and Tasha both. Left voicemails. Sent texts. No reply. I sat up all night with her, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, whispering that I was there. That I wasn't going anywhere. They both replied the following evening. Mark with a thumbs up emoji, and Tasha with oh no. Hope she feels better soon. That's when the last thread of illusion snapped for me. They weren't co-parents. They were absentee landlords, of a child they'd never loved properly, and I was the tenant cleaning up the broken pipes while pretending everything was fine. When Ava turned 8, she wrote a school essay titled The Person I Admire Most. She didn't name me directly, but I knew. Every line was about the woman who made her favorite breakfast, waited in the car line every afternoon, stayed up late to help her with her solar system project. She ended it with, I hope I grow up to be like her. She doesn't yell, she just keeps going, even when people don't say thank you. I cried that night, quietly in the hallway, after she'd fallen asleep, because that was the first time I realized Ava saw it. She knew. She may not have the words for it yet, but she knew where home really was. Still, I never pushed her to call me mom. I never wanted to take anything from her, only to give her what I could. But after what Tasha said at brunch, just the babysitter, I realized something else. They were never going to recognize me, not willingly, not kindly. And the day would come when their lack of recognition could cost Ava something real, security, stability, a future. So I kept building my case, quietly, lovingly, and with the kind of resolve that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. I didn't expect thank yous anymore. That phase passed years ago. But there's a difference between not needing validation and being erased. One is survival. The other is slow erosion. I didn't notice when it started. Not exactly, but I remember the first time it stung. It was Ava's ballet recital. She was 6, her little tutu kept sliding sideways and she was so nervous her fingers twitched the whole performance. I had curled her hair that morning, packed her tights, brought snacks in a Ziploc bag that crinkled too loudly in my purse. And I was proud, bone-deep proud, when she took her place on that stage. After the show, we waited with the other parents to greet the dancers. When Ava saw me, she lit up, ran into my arms. A few people smiled warmly, nodded, and then Tasha appeared, 45 minutes late, full makeup, carrying a bouquet that probably cost more than the entire recital costume. She crouched down next to Ava like she hadn't missed the whole thing. My little star. She gushed, snapping selfies while Ava looked up at her, blinking. Let's get one for Instagram. Sweetie, I stood back. Not because I didn't want to be part of the moment, but because I wasn't invited into it. A few moms nearby glanced at me. One of them, kindly, asked, "Is that her mom?" I nodded. I always nodded. It was easier than explaining the layers. At the end of the night, Tasha hugged Ava, handed her the flowers, and walked off without a word to me. When we got home, Ava set the bouquet on the counter and said, "Why did she call me sweetie? She doesn't even know I hate roses." That made me pause. I asked gently, "You don't like roses?" She wrinkled her nose. "They smell weird, you know that." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it reminded me that some things don't need to be claimed loudly to be real. Still, that was the night I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. No matter how much I did, in their eyes, I didn't exist. Not really. Tasha was the mother in photos. I was the woman holding the diaper bag in the background. And Mark, he'd vanished, behind layers of avoidance. Every time I tried to bring up something real, Ava's future, her sense of identity, my place in all of this, he'd dodge it. Say things like, "Let's not ruin a nice evening," or "You always take things so seriously." But I was serious because someone had to be. My parents weren't much help either. They liked order, image. They didn't want to pick sides, so instead, they smoothed over everything. When I gently mentioned that Ava had started asking questions about her name, about why she didn't live with her parents, my mother sighed and said, "Claire, you're doing such a wonderful job. You should be grateful they trust you." Grateful as if I'd won a prize, as if raising someone else's child with no rights, no title, and no acknowledgement was a favor I should be thankful for. At first, I let those words slide off me, but they didn't disappear. They sank that week. I found myself withdrawing more, not from Ava, never from her but from them. Family brunches, birthday dinners, forced holidays. I'd still show up, but not fully. Not like before. They noticed, of course. My mother made little comments. "You seem distant lately. You used to be more helpful. Tasha's worried you're holding resentment." Resentment, that wasn't the word. It was something deeper. Like standing outside your own house, and watching strangers rearrange the furniture while insisting they're just keeping things in order. One afternoon, Ava came home from school with a drawing assignment. The paper was labeled, "My Family." She had drawn me and her holding hands, standing in front of our house. A small dog beside us, imaginary, but cute. Behind us was a sun, with a smiley face and a rainbow stretching over the roof. No Tasha, no Mark, just us. I asked her, carefully, "Is this your whole family?" She looked up from her juice box. "Well, yeah. I live with you." And I wanted to say something then, something meaningful. But I didn't. I just nodded and kissed the top of her head, because even at her age, Ava knew what most adults pretended not to. Home isn't who takes credit, it's who shows up. Still, something shifted after that drawing. I started noticing how little space I was given in the narratives around me. At Ava's school, I was listed as the emergency contact but technically still other. On forms, I wrote guardian, non-legal, so often it became muscle memory. At family events, when people asked how Ava was, they turned to Tasha, not me. When she was sick, it was me she clung to. When she was scared, it was me she called for. But when the photo albums came out, or when someone brought up parenting choices, I was invisible again, background noise. Once, at a New Year's party, someone asked Tasha if she had any resolutions. She laughed and said, "Maybe be a better mom this year." Everyone clapped. I stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping down juice spills, wondering how many more years I'd have to live like this, present in every way that mattered, but always 2 steps out of frame. Eventually, I stopped waiting to be included. I started drawing my own lines. When they scheduled family photos and forgot to tell me, I didn't complain. I just booked my own session with Ava, casual, just us, with silly faces and gummy smiles. I printed one and framed it above my desk. When Tasha posted another Girls' Day with my mini-me photo after picking Ava up for 2 hours at the mall, I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Ava came home saying she was bored, that they barely talked, and she missed me halfway through lunch. I didn't even flinch because by now, the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled into something deeper, a kind of weight I carried every day. A heaviness I wore like a second skin. Invisible motherhood isn't loud. It doesn't break dishes or demand attention. It just stays. It endures. It folds laundry, and checks for fevers and reads bedtime stories even when it's exhausted. It hopes. But lately, I'd stopped hoping for acknowledgement, and started planning for protection. Ava was getting older. She was asking smarter questions. The cracks were showing not just in them, but in the fragile arrangement we'd all pretended was stable. And I wasn't going to let her fall through them. Not now. Not ever. I didn't slam any doors when I got home. Didn't throw anything or break down. Ava had fallen asleep in the car, her head tilted gently toward the window, arms curled around her little stuffed cat. I carried her to bed and tucked her in the way I always did, soft light on, socks off, whispering that I loved her before backing out of the room. Then I stood in the hallway for a while, quiet. My body felt heavy, but my mind wouldn't stop moving. I could still hear Tasha's voice from that brunch, chirping out she's just the babysitter, like it was a harmless joke, like it didn't undo a decade of sleepless nights and scraped knees and school pickups in the rain. I sat at the kitchen table, elbows on the wood, and stared at the drawer where I kept the folder. I hadn't opened it in over a year. Not because I forgot it was there, but because I hadn't wanted to admit I might need it. But now it didn't feel paranoid. It felt necessary. I pulled the folder out slowly. Same navy blue. Same silver clasp. Inside, everything I'd collected over the years sat waiting, neat, quiet, patient, like it knew one day it would matter. There were medical records from every pediatric visit I'd taken Ava to. Immunization histories with my number listed, report cards with my email copied. Notes from teachers thanking me for showing up on short notice. Copies of school forms where I had filled in guardian and added a small asterisk next to it, just in case anyone asked what that meant. There were pictures too, candid ones, of Ava in Halloween costumes, birthday hats, toothless grins holding up her first lost tooth. All taken at my house. At our house, I pulled out the sheet I'd last added and began reviewing everything, one document at a time. And with each page, something hardened in me. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about truth and protection. I remembered something my grandmother once said back when I was a teenager and thought I knew everything. She told me, people will rewrite your story if you don't keep your own copy. That's what this folder had become. My copy of the story. Not the one Tasha told online. Not the version Mark passively let happen, the real one, and now, it needed to become more than memories, it needed to become proof. I started scanning, and backing up everything, one file at a time. Digital copies in a secure folder. Printed duplicates in a labeled envelope. I even emailed copies to myself with date stamps. Quiet measures. No drama, just preparation. That week, I called a family attorney. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ava. I didn't need a courtroom. Not yet. I just wanted to understand the rules. Where I stood. What rights I had, if any, and how to protect the ones I'd earned through action, not bloodlines. The woman I met with, Ellen, was calm and direct. Late 50s, firm handshake. The kind of voice that didn't rise when things got tense. She listened while I explained the situation. I didn't try to make it sound more dramatic than it was. I just laid it out. 10 years of being the default parent with no legal recognition. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You've done everything a parent does, she said. But if they decide to challenge you, it won't matter what you've done. It'll matter what you can prove. That sentence stayed with me. It didn't scare me. It focused me. Because I could prove it. I'd been proving it every day for a decade. I just needed to organize what life had scattered. Ellen helped me create a plan, a long-term custody strategy that didn't require war. Just readiness. We discussed guardianship petitions, statements from teachers, neighbors, Ava's pediatrician. Nothing aggressive, just methodical. She also recommended something I hadn't thought of. A journal, not emotional reflections, but dates, facts, routines. A log of what I did and when. So I started keeping one. Quietly. Monday. Picked Ava up from school. Dentist at 4. Finished homework together. Wednesday. Sick day. Fever at 101. Gave meds. Stayed home from work. Friday. Ava had nightmares again. Slept beside me. Calmed down around to a .m. No embellishments. Just truth, written plainly. Meanwhile, on the outside, I stayed the same. I showed up for Sunday dinners, nodded politely when Tasha told stories. Let Mark avoid eye contact. I didn't challenge them. I didn't throw their words back in their faces. I didn't need to. Because I was working on something more powerful than confrontation, evidence, backed by silence. At Ava's school, I confirmed with the counselor that I was the only one attending meetings. I asked her, gently, if she'd be willing to write a short note on my involvement for Ava's file. She didn't hesitate at the pediatric office. I asked to be listed as primary contact. Again, no resistance. They said, "You've been that for years. We'll make it official." Piece by piece, it came together. One day, Ava asked me why I was using the printer so much lately. I smiled. Just some boring grown-up paperwork, honey. She rolled her eyes and skipped back to her room, already moving on to something more exciting. But I watched her go with a different kind of calm, because I knew what I was doing now. I wasn't waiting anymore for validation, for recognition, for someone else to stand up and say, "She's the one who raised her." I was building a quiet wall, one brick at a time. And when the time came, if it ever did, I wouldn't need to explain myself with tears or outrage. I'd just hand over the folder and let the facts speak louder than any brunch insult ever could. It started with a bedtime question, quiet, offhand, but heavy enough to silence the room. Why don't I live with mommy? Ava had been brushing her doll's hair while I folded laundry on the edge of her bed. She didn't look at me when she asked it, which made it easier for both of us to pretend it was just curiosity, not something that had been building for years. I set the shirt down and took a breath. "That's a good question," I said, keeping my voice even. "And it's okay to wonder about it." She nodded, still not looking up. "I mean, other kids live with their mommies." "I know," I said gently. "Every family is a little different." She paused. "But she is my real mom, right?" That word real sat between us like something sharp. I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her how many real things aren't visible. I just said, "She's your biological mom." "Yes, that's true." Then I folded another shirt, slowly, to give myself a second. "But I live with you." "You do, and you come to everything. Doctor, school homework, you make pancakes." I smiled a little. "Pancakes are important." She turned then. Her voice dropped. "So why does she get to be the mom?" I didn't answer that one right away. Some questions need space more than they need words. Eventually, I said, "Sometimes adults don't always do what they're supposed to, and when that happens, someone else steps in, like a substitute teacher." She asked. I hesitated because it wasn't wrong, but it also wasn't right. "Maybe at first," I said quietly, "but not forever." She looked at me, then, her eyes a little watery, like she hadn't expected the answer to sting. I leaned forward and tucked her hair behind her ear. "You can love more than one person, Ava, and you get to decide who feels like home." She nodded. Then she said, "You feel like home." And that was the moment it changed for me. Not the legal plan, not the documents, not the silence. That sentence, that clarity. She was growing up. And with that came questions I could no longer shield her from. But I could guide her through them with grace and truth, and without turning her into the rope in someone else's tug-of-war. That week, I started weaving small lessons into our daily routine, nothing obvious, just seeds. When we passed by the park, and she saw a mom yelling at her son, I asked her what she thought kindness looked like. When she struggled with a school friend who lied to her, I asked how honesty made her feel. And when she mentioned a classmate whose parents fought in front of her, I asked how safety shows up and who, in her life, made her feel safe. She always said you. I never said, "I'm your mom." I didn't need to. Instead, I helped her name what love looks like. Consistency, listening, showing up, even when it's hard. And over time, she began connecting the dots herself. Meanwhile, something in Tasha began to shift. She never said it directly, but I could feel it in the small things. She started texting more often, asking to take Ava shopping, or suddenly wanting weekend visits after months of silence. She'd show up with designer bags and too loud greetings, snapping photos Ava barely smiled in. Ava would come home quiet and withdrawn. Once, after one of those visits, she muttered, "She says we need more time to bond." I didn't react. I just asked how she felt about that. She shrugged. It's like being on a job interview. That hit hard. Later that night, Ava handed me back a bracelet Tasha had bought her. It's too tight, she said. But I saw the tag was still on it. It wasn't about the size. It was about the pressure. Still, I never badmouthed Tasha, not once. Even when Ava said she felt confused. Even when she said, I think she wants me to call her mommy again. I simply said, that's up to you. You're allowed to choose. Who feels right? I wasn't going to fight for Ava's loyalty. I didn't need to. Because love, real love, doesn't require reminders. It shows itself in the details. But Tasha wasn't built that way, and the more she sensed she was slipping, the more erratic she became. She started dropping passive-aggressive lines during family events. Claire's been so hands-on, hasn't she? With that tight little smile. Or, it's so nice that Ava still remembers who her mother is. And no one said anything. Not Mark. Not my parents. Not even Ava, though I saw her flinch once, after one of those dinners. Ava climbed into my lap and whispered, do I have to love someone just because they say I should? I hugged her. No, baby. Love is a choice, not a rule. A few days later, Tasha tried something new. She showed up unannounced at school, said she wanted to surprise Ava and take her to lunch. The school called me first, as they always did. Policy required approval from the listed contact. When I arrived, Ava was sitting in the office, looking small. Tasha stood next to her, arms folded. I stayed calm. Hey Ava, I said warmly, crouching to her level. You okay? She nodded but didn't smile. Tasha didn't look at me when she said, I just wanted some time with my daughter. Is that a crime? I looked at the receptionist, then back at Tasha. Next time, a heads up would help. She's my child, Tasha snapped. And right there, in front of school staff and a confused 10-year-old, she made the mistake I'd been waiting for. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, let's talk outside. She followed me reluctantly. Once we were alone, I handed her a sealed envelope. What's this? Just a courtesy notice. You'll want to read it. It was a formal request for supervised visitation, filed through the family court system. Not a lawsuit. Not a threat. Just paperwork. Tasha paled. You're seriously doing this? Nodded. Ava deserves structure. And clarity. Her voice rose. You think you can just take her? No, I said softly. I already did the work. I'm just making it official. She stared at me for a long time. But I didn't blink. I didn't back down. Because love, when it's consistent, becomes its own leverage. That night, Ava crawled into bed beside me again. She whispered, I didn't want to go with her. I just didn't know how to say no. I brushed her hair back. You don't owe anyone anything, sweetheart, not even family, especially not when it costs you your peace. And in the quiet that followed, something shifted. Not in Ava, in me, because for the first time, I wasn't just protecting her. I was preparing to claim her. It happened on a Wednesday. I was halfway through uploading Ava's field trip permission slip when the school's administrative assistant called me, not in the usual polite tone I was used to, but with something tighter, cautious, like she wasn't sure how I'd respond. Claire, she said, we just need to confirm. Did you authorize Ava's withdrawal paperwork? I blinked. What paperwork? There was a pause on the other end. Your sister-in-law was here this morning. She brought a letter stating Ava would be transferring to a private academy. She said the decision had been made. For a second, I couldn't speak, not out of panic, but out of something colder, clearer. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd jumped the fence and set fire to everything on the other side. I thanked the woman for calling, told her under no circumstances was Ava to be released, to anyone, and hung up. Then I sat still, the phone warm in my hand, the folder already open beside me on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the enrollment form Tasha had attempted to force through, and felt the quiet solidify into something sharper. She hadn't come to me. She hadn't called. She hadn't even pretended to include Ava in the decision. This wasn't about parenting. It wasn't about concern. It was about control. It was about making a move, one that dared me to react, and I would. Just not the way she expected. That afternoon, I picked Ava up myself. She ran to the car. arms full of papers and a glitter-covered science project. When we got home, I made her hot chocolate. Then I emailed my attorney. The legal motion was ready within 48 hours, a formal petition to establish legal guardianship, with supporting affidavits from Ava's school, pediatrician, and after-school counselor, all of them attesting to one thing, that I had been Ava's de facto parent for nearly a decade, that I was the one who knew her allergies, her bedtime routine, the full story behind her anxiety about loud noises and why she hated being around birthday clowns. All the small, invisible things that matter. We didn't serve the papers immediately. Ellen, my attorney, said something I'll never forget. There's strategy and timing, Claire. Let them show their hand fully. Let them dig the hole themselves. So we waited. And sure enough, Tasha followed up with the school again 2 days later, demanding to speak to the principal. She arrived with another printed document, this time, a glossy brochure for a private prep school across town, one with a hefty tuition and a reputation for exclusivity. She deserves better. She told them, loud enough for the front desk to hear. She doesn't belong in a place like this. The principal called me afterward, clearly shaken. She said you were just the caretaker, he added, apologetically. That we were mistaken in letting you act as the contact. She can say what she wants, I replied calmly. But the paperwork is on the way. And it was. That evening, Ellen filed the motion, not as an attack but as a protection. The notice went out the next morning, delivered to both Mark and Tasha. They didn't call me. But the silence said everything. The next family gathering was awkward before I even arrived. It was supposed to be a birthday dinner for my father. Ava had made him a card with pressed leaves, and a tiny joke scribbled in pencil. We walked in together, hand in hand. Tasha barely looked up. Mark was pale and fitted, my parents. They were all nerves and soft tones. My mother pulled me aside halfway through the meal and whispered, was this really necessary? I looked her in the eyes. She tried to pull Ava out of school without telling anyone. You tell me what's necessary. She sighed. Maybe she just got overwhelmed. I shook my head. No. She got challenged. There's a difference. The rest of the night blurred, but one thing stood out. When dessert was served, Tasha made a show of saying, I hope everything works out for the child's sake. Not our daughter, not Ava, just the child. The room went quiet. No one responded. Ava leaned toward me and whispered, why did she say it like that? I gave her a tired smile. Because sometimes people don't know how to talk about what they've already let go of. After that, everything moved quickly. Tasha and Mark both lawyered up. But their filings were thin, emotional claims without practical foundation. Mark's attorney leaned heavily on biology. Tasha's focused on intent. But neither had the substance, because while they were talking about what should be, I had a 10-year track record of what was. And now, the court had it too. We submitted Ava's medical timeline, her school progress, her daily routine, even letters from neighbors who'd seen her grow up in my home, attend barbecues, build snowmen in my driveway, walk to the bus stop from my porch. The judge requested a private evaluation. Ava met with a court-appointed specialist, a warm, thoughtful woman who later told me, that little girl knows exactly who she trusts. And still, I never badmouthed Tasha, never threw Mark under the bus, because I knew. I didn't have to. They were doing that work themselves. By trying to reclaim a child they'd neglected for 10 years. They were confirming exactly what they feared. I'd proved that I wasn't just babysitting. I was mothering. Not through words, but through the slow, daily accumulation of presence, of knowing what makes her laugh, of staying when things got hard, of never needing to be seen, because being there was enough, until now. Now I needed to be seen, because Ava deserved the kind of permanence you can't buy with sudden brunch visits or court-approved speeches, and I was ready to give it to her. The courtroom wasn't large, nothing like what you see on TV. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and old carpet, and the air conditioning clicked unevenly. Still, the quiet inside felt heavier than anything I'd prepared for. Ava sat beside me in the waiting area, her small fingers curled around the edge of a well-loved book. I'd let her bring it not because she needed to read, but because sometimes familiar things help hold you together. She wasn't nervous. Not really. She looked thoughtful, more curious, then scared. I, on the other hand, Had a heart that wouldn't sit still, but I wore calm like armor. The judge called us in at 10:04. We sat, no theatrics, no drama, just wood-paneled walls, a few scattered files, and the low hum of things finally coming to a head. Mark and Tasha were already seated across the aisle. He looked tired, maybe guilty, maybe just uncomfortable. Tasha, though she looked polished, sharp, defensive. Her eyes flicked to me once, but not Ava. Never Ava. Their attorney stood first. He led with biology, of course, names on certificates, DNA. The parents never surrendered rights, he insisted, using the word parents, like it had done any of the parenting. The argument was clinical, cold, paper deep. Then he moved on to image. Our clients have every intention of re-engaging more fully. They've been misrepresented. They never gave up responsibility. He gestured toward a printed album. They submitted photos of birthday parties, school concerts, snapshots from events I knew. They hadn't stayed for longer than 10 minutes. I didn't interrupt. The judge flipped through the album slowly, then set it down. Then it was our turn. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the folder on the desk, the one I'd spent years building, page by page. School logs, pediatrician records, letters from teachers, Ava's counselor, even a short note from our neighbor, Mrs. Conway, who had seen Ava walk home from the bus stop holding my hand every weekday for the past 7 years. Then came the calendar, one I'd printed from my email history, color-coded appointments, PTA meetings, therapy sessions, every field trip I'd chaperoned, every sick day, every parent-teacher conference, no speeches, just receipts. The judge skimmed through each item, occasionally nodding, occasionally underlining. Then she looked up. I'd like to speak to the child, she said. Privately. I looked at Ava, she looked at me. Ava, she looked at me. You okay? I asked quietly. She nodded. It's okay. I want to. The judge took her into chambers. The door clicked shut. It was the longest 22 minutes of my life. When Ava returned, her expression was calm, steady. She walked straight back to me, sat down, and said nothing. I didn't ask. The judge returned 5 minutes later. Sat down, folded her hands. She cleared her throat, then spoke in the kind of deliberate, measured tone that carries weight without needing volume. I've reviewed all documentation presented. I've spoken with the child. I've considered not just legal precedent, but the emotional and physical continuity of care. She paused. It is the court's opinion that the petitioner, Claire Morgan, has acted in every way as this child's primary parent, not just in function, but in commitment, consistency, and emotional stability. Tasha stiffened. I hereby grant full legal custody of Ava Morgan to Claire Morgan, effective immediately. Tasha stood, stunned. She's just the babysitter, she burst out. The room went still. The judge didn't flinch. She looked at Tasha with the same calm she'd shown all morning. Not according to this court, she said, and that was it. No applause, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of something long overdue finally falling into place. Afterward, Ava and I walked outside. The sky was overcast. The wind cool. She reached up and took my hand without saying anything. We didn't go home, right away. We drove to a small cafe around the corner. I let her order a slice of chocolate cake at 10 in the morning. She didn't even finish it, just poked at it with her fork, smiling. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "The judge asked who I go to when I'm scared." What did you say? She shrugged like it was obvious. I nodded. That's a good answer. And then she asked, who tucks me in at night? Who knows what I want to be when I grow up? Who remembers my teacher's name? And, she smiled. I said, I know who raised me. There it was. Not the ruling. Not the documents. That sentence, that truth. She knew she always had. The paperwork came through on a Tuesday. It arrived in a plain manila envelope. No fanfare, no embossed lettering, just documents that meant everything. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. I think I'd already done all my shaking months ago. I stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment after reading the words. Full legal custody awarded to Claire Morgan, and seeing Ava's new legal name printed at the top. Her last name now matched mine. Something small, symbolic, but it landed with quiet weight. Ava Morgan, no hyphens. No shared last names with people who vanished when things got hard. Just hers. Just ours. She was at school when it arrived, so I didn't say anything until dinner. I made her favorite grilled cheese with tomato soup and too many croutons. When she finished her second bowl, I handed her the envelope. She opened it slowly, scanned the first page, and smiled, not with surprise, but with calm. So it's really done. It's really done. She reached over, took a sip of her milk, and said, "Cool." That was it, and that was perfect. In the weeks that followed, nothing outwardly changed, and yet everything did. She started signing school forms. With her new last name without hesitation, I updated her records. The counselor at school gave us a quiet congratulations. Our neighbor, Mrs. Conway, left a small bouquet on our porch with a note that simply said, "Now they know what we've always known." Mark kept his distance. We haven't spoken since the ruling? I heard through my father that he didn't want to cause more drama. I didn't respond. Silence, by then, had become my clearest language. Tasha disappeared entirely. No more texts. No surprise visits. No veiled comments through mutual family. The last thing she said in court was still ringing in my ears. "She's just the babysitter." That sentence used to hurt. Now it didn't. Because here's what Tasha never understood. Babysitters leave at the end of the night. They don't stay when the child has a fever. They don't memorize which stuffed animal calms her down or know exactly how she likes her sandwich. Cut. They don't file custody papers and they don't get called mom. But I do. She said it for the first time one night, when she was half asleep, her voice groggy, her head on my shoulder, in that liminal space between dream and truth. "Good night, Mom." She didn't correct herself. I didn't comment, we just let it hang there. A few weeks later, she said it again, this time while waving goodbye to me from the school steps. "Bye, Mom." Other kids turned to look. One teacher smiled. And I stood there for a moment longer than usual, the word lingering in the air, like something earned, not given, because that's what it was. Not a title, a testimony. Ava's world changed in small, quiet ways. Her drawings had our house and just us now. No extras added out of obligation. When people asked who I was, she no longer hesitated. "That's my mom," she'd say, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. It is, now. But it wasn't always. There were years where I questioned everything. Nights where I wondered if loving a child was enough, if it counted, legally, emotionally, socially, when your name wasn't on a birth certificate. When your role was never spoken aloud. When your presence was always assumed but never acknowledged. And now, I don't need anyone to acknowledge it, because I have the only acknowledgement that matters. From the girl who once asked me why she lived with me instead of her real mom, now she knows. Not because I told her, but because I showed her. Every lunch packed. Every fever cooled. Every bedtime story read on nights I could barely keep my eyes open. Love can be loud, but it can also be steady, predictable, grounded, and sometimes, that's what children need more than anything, to be loved by someone who never leaves. One day, while folding laundry, Ava said, "Do you think I'll be a mom like you someday?" I paused. "What kind of mom is that?" She grinned. "The kind that just knows." I smiled back. "Then I hope so, because the truth is, I didn't win Ava. This wasn't a competition, it was a lifetime of showing up. I didn't fight to take her away from anyone. I fought to put a name to something that already existed. To protect a relationship that had grown, not out of biology, but out of every quiet moment when I chose to stay, and now she knows. So when people ask if I've ever had kids, I don't pause. I don't explain. I don't say technically. I just say, I have a daughter. And she calls me mom.